So he was born in this tiny little village called Sotto il Monte. It's been my great pleasure on 3 visits to Italy to go to Sotto il Monte, to visit the place where he was born, to celebrate Mass in the church where he was baptised and celebrated his first Mass as a priest, to visit the places that were quite important to him as a man and as a priest. And his former secretary, now Cardinal Capovilla, who is 98 years of age, lives in the family holiday house at Sotto il Monte and keeps alive the memory of Pope John the 23rd. So Sotto il Monte is a beautiful little village that Pope John's from, and Bergamo is the wonderful city that I'll speak a bit about tonight. I'm a Melbourne boy through and through, okay? But if I ever run away from Melbourne, I said to the guys, come and find me in Bergamo. That's where you'll find me, because it's a beautiful city. There's a great spirit amongst the clergy. There's a wonderful sense of hospitality amongst them, and a wonderful sense of peasant shrewdness, but also earthiness about them. A bit like Pope John. You walk through Sotto il Monte in Bergamo, and you think Pope John still walks the streets. A certain spirit about him. So that's the little village of Sotto il Monte. As a young teenager, Pope John began what would become his great spiritual journal, called Journal of the Soul. He wrote in Italian called Il Giornale dell'Anima. He started the journal as a young seminarian, young teenager, and kept it going right until his papacy and the end of his life in 63. Then it was published and was made available in a number of different languages. I believe that a close analysis of the Journal of the Soul gives us an insight into the man, his thoughts, his ideas, and his language that he'd bring to his leadership, his style of ministry, the papacy, and then the all-important decision to call this extraordinary gathering called the Second Vatican Council. That's in the future. Go back to the past, okay? You've got the journal in front of you. This is the English translation, Journal of the Soul. In the left-hand column, you've got Pope John's writing, Soli Deo honor et gloriam, only to God be the honour and the glory, Il Giornale dell'Anima, Journal of the Soul, okay? Turn over the page. This is an entry. He was born in 1881. This is an entry from 1898, okay? As a young teenager in the seminary. Let's read the entry there, 1/3 of the way down, 31st of August, Wednesday, in retreat. Who's got a nice loud voice like to read for us? Because you'll be sick of my voice by then tonight. Who's going to read that little entry for us? Volunteer, someone?
I'll do it.
Go. The preparations.
The novena, the extraordinary celebrations of Alexander's feast, made it difficult for me to perform all my practices of piety, or rather, to tell the truth. They swept me off my feet. Now that I have come back from all the festivities, I can settle down and make my retreat. I will not waste time by repeating how badly I have spent the month. Few brief notes I have made till now are sufficient evidence of that.
Keep going.
What alarms me most of all is my inconsistency in God's service. I say 1,000 times with St. Augustine that I will rise again, but unlike him, I always fall back.
What hits you about that entry? 17-year-old. What hits you about that entry? Honest? Humble? What else?
Humorous.
Humorous a little bit, yep. Doesn't take himself too seriously. What else?
Self-awareness.
Good self-awareness, yep.
Determination to keep trying.
Determination to keep trying. What else?
He's just like all the rest of us.
He's just like all the rest of us. He puts his finger on the great challenge of the spiritual life. He puts his finger on the source material for the Bible. As a people of faith, we're called by God, loved by him, graced by him, but we stumble and fall on this journey of faith. Puts his finger on all this honesty, okay? You read the journals of some of the great saints of the church, in particular the medieval saints and those who came in the 15th, 16th century. You often read their journals and I get depressed. Like you read it, there's this anguished cry of the heart. There's the dark night of the soul. There's this titanic battle between the forces of good and evil and sin everywhere and the devil every 5 minutes tempting me. There's none of this here. No apocalyptic battle between the forces of good and evil. Just an honest, young, earnest seminarian saying, I have these resolutions, I try, I fall, but by God's grace I might get up again. Remarkable openness, honesty, humility, and self-awareness. This is the beginning of the great character of Angelo Roncalli. Keep reading. Worst of all?
Worst of all, recently, partly through my own negligence, partly for other reasons, I've been many days without going to confession. And to think of what St. Charles Borromeo went to confession twice a day.
I don't know what Borromeo was up to, but he's a great saint, and he went twice a day. Wow. Who was Charles Borromeo? Does anyone know who Charles Borromeo was? This is going to be a very important character and figure in Pope John's life. Who was Charles Borromeo? He's a bishop, he's a saint, he's a cardinal. Can anyone place him in terms of time and place? He lived during the time, just after the Council of Trent, okay? In the, say, 1563 was the end of the Council of Trent, okay? And Borromeo was the Archbishop of the great Italian city of Milan, okay? Great saint, bit of an ascetic sort of figure, very serious, very determined, took this business of sin and the spiritual life and the formation of clergy very seriously. Borromeo was tough, like really tough. He makes Cardinal George Pell look like the fairy godmother. Borromeo was really tough. At clergy retreats, if the clergy played up, he'd made them kneel, recite the penitential psalms on their knees, and then feed them with bread and water for the day. That's how tough he was, okay? But there's something about the figure of Borromeo throughout post-Trent history in Catholic theology and spirituality, especially for priests and bishops. Borromeo is the great model bishop, model cleric. As tough as he was, he's this great model, okay? But John the 23rd approaches Borromeo from a different side. You see, why was the Council of Trent called in the 1600s?
Because of Protestantism.
Because of Protestant, because of the threats that Martin Luther, Augustinian Catholic monk, was making in terms of challenging Catholic doctrine, challenging Catholic authority, challenging abuses in the church, okay? So the church had to deal with doctrinal points of view that it disagreed with in terms of what Luther was saying, what the Protestant reformers were saying. The other thing that Trent did at the time of the council was to introduce some pastoral reforms to the church. Pastoral renewal. What were some of these reforms and renewal that Trent brought about and that Borromeo was the great exemplar of?
They weren't to live like rich princes.
The bishops weren't to live like rich princes. My. Isn't that something new in the history of the Catholic Church, okay? What is it about the office of bishop that Trent deliberately reformed and changed in a big way?
That to stay in their diocese.
One diocese only, Mons. You see, we're used to the fact today that in the Diocese of Sandhurst, there's one bishop, Bishop Tomlinson. I'm from Melbourne, Archbishop Hart's the bishop. Ballarat has got Bishop Bird. Wilcannia Forbes has got another guy. Broom's got another guy. Adelaide's got another, okay? One bishop, one diocese. At the time of the Council of Trent, bishops had multiple dioceses, numerous ones. Generally, bishops came from noble lineage, aristocratic lineage, okay? They're in charge of these multiple dioceses. Sometimes, bishops had no idea where these dioceses were, especially out in the sticks. They particularly didn't care about them, okay? They'd send someone out, a vicar general, a legate, someone to represent them to, go and get information, report back to me, and bring back the money. Catholics, okay? The money. Trent said, no, this is an abuse in the church. From now on, there'll be one bishop for one diocese. Okay? You are now to reside in that diocese under penalty of losing some privilege. You are to reside in that diocese. You are to undertake an extensive visitation of that diocese. You are to establish a seminary for the proper formation of clergy. You are to instruct the spiritual life of priests and people. Okay? This is what Trent mandated, okay? Trent mandated that there be one bishop, for no more prostituting themselves around for the rich and powerful diocese. Rich or poor, big or small, you're the bishop, you're in charge of the diocese. And you are to have the care of souls. In Latin, the cura animarum, for the spiritual care of priests and people. Now you're thinking, why is this ex-salesman from Melbourne telling us all about this, okay? Because Borromeo came from fairly noble lineage. After studying civil and canon law, he was called to Rome to be the Secretary of State to his uncle, Pius IV. Now, I can say this because I'm Italian. This is what Italians do. They treat the church like a family business, okay? And they look after their own. So Borromeo is the Secretary of State in Rome to his uncle Pius IV, chief advisor. In Rome, with me? In Rome, Borromeo is appointed the administrator of the Diocese of Milan. You got me? He's pushing the desk in Rome, but he's appointed the administrator of the Milan Diocese. Borromeo goes to Trent for the last session. And there at Trent, with the other bishops, he realises, hey, these guys are serious about one bishop, one diocese. These guys are serious about this business of residence, and you must stay in the diocese now. So he comes back to Rome and says to Uncle Pius, Zio, got to get out of here. Trent's serious, so I let go of all officers and benefices in Rome, and I will now go to Milan. And he began an extensive visitation of the diocese and an extensive renewal of the diocese. Roncalli studied this and thought, this is in the DNA of bishops. This is what bishops must do. This is how bishops must serve. They must be shepherds and fathers of the diocese, okay? I want to come back to this a little bit more, but I needed to give this in terms of context, okay? So that's Roncalli as a young teenager coming into contact with the great figure of Borromeo, which I'll show you later is actually central to his historical thinking and his style of ministry and spirituality, okay? It'll all connect. If it doesn't connect, I don't get paid tonight, okay? All right. Next column. This is Journal of a Soul. Same document, but in 1903, okay? In 1903, Roncalli is on the verge of ordination to the priesthood. He's gone from Bergamo to Rome to complete his studies for the priesthood, okay? And watch now the seminarian, almost deacon, almost priest, and the language he uses in Journal of a Soul now. Could I get you to keep reading now about just after halfway down, the paragraph that says, "It will always be my principle."
It will always be my principle in all spheres of religious knowledge and in all theological and biblical questions to find out first of all the traditional teachings of the Church, and on this basis to judge the finding of contemporary scholarship. I do not despise criticism, and I shall be most careful not to think ill of critics or treat them with disrespect. On the contrary, I love it.
Just stop there. Criticism is, this is a poor Italian, English translation of an Italian word. The Italian word is la critica. It's not criticism, I criticise you. It's critical historical study, okay? He's saying, I don't despise critical historical study. Keep going.
I shall be glad to keep up with the most recent findings. I shall study the new systems of thought and their continual evolution and their trends. Criticism for me is light, is truth, and there is only one truth, which is sacred.
Now, that's only 5 years apart. What do you notice about those two entries now in Journal of a Soul? Maturity of thought. What else?
Oh, humility again.
Sense of humility, yep. What else? What else do you notice when you compare the two? It's only 5 years apart, same man, different...
More from the internal, the external.
Bit more internal, thinking about certain issues, yep. What else?
To draw on previous wisdoms.
Drawing on other sources of wisdom, okay? You see, in only 5 years, he's moved from Bergamo to Rome, and in Rome at this time, in 1903, there were new ideas percolating in the church. New ideas about a critical, historical approach to theology and the Bible. You see, today, we take this for granted, but back then, the German Protestant biblical scholars were saying, let's look at the Bible in a much more critical way. Let's see the different ways the Bible was written. Different authors, different audiences, different methods used to communicate, not scientific truth, not verified, but sometimes there was a certain mythology used in the Bible. So the German Protestant biblical scholars were meddling with this. The Catholic Church was saying, no way, Jose. We don't accept that at all. But this was happening in Rome, and John the 23rd, Angelo Roncalli, is in the midst of people talking about these new ideas. Look at the last sentence that was just read out. I shall be glad to keep up with the most recent findings. I shall study the new systems of thought and their continual evolution and their trends. Okay? There's a much more sophisticated language here. You see, he's left hometown Bergamo and he's come to the big shining lights of Rome. And he finds in Rome a bit of conflict in the church, new ideas, new thoughts, new ways of approaching theology and the Bible. Okay? Angelo Roncalli is using Journal of the Soul to come to terms with an internal, spiritual and intellectual struggle. Can you see it in the words here? He's struggling with the traditional teaching of the church is this, but I'm trying to be open to these new wisdoms, new insights. It's showing an essential part of his character, openness to new ideas. You can see and feel here this tension, the spiritual, intellectual tension within him, okay? This is the young historian growing in maturity, using the Journal of the Soul to do something in particular. He's using Journal of the Soul to do what we historians are paid to do. He's using Journal of the Soul, his personal internal writings, to interpret change. Okay? If we don't get this, this man makes no sense, and the council he called makes no sense whatsoever. He's trying to interpret change, okay? And you'll see this a bit more as we go on tonight. That's what he's trying to do here in Journal of the Soul, okay? That was 1903. In 1904, he gets ordained a priest, okay? In Rome, he did what back then was called the all-purpose doctorate of theology, okay? He didn't actually specialise in history, but developed a love for history, but got the all-purpose doctorate for ordination, okay? It was then expected that he would go on to study canon law. Thank God he didn't study canon law, okay? With all due respect, are there any canon lawyers in the room? We need canon law, but thank goodness this man wasn't asked to study canon law, okay? Just after his ordination in Rome, there was a new bishop appointed to his diocese, okay? Turn over the page. See that very noble-looking figure there? Very noble ecclesiastic there. That's Bishop Giacomo Rodini Tedeschi, okay? He was appointed the new bishop of Bergamo. Because he had worked in Rome and had Roman connections, he was ordained a bishop in Rome, in the Sistine Chapel, by Pope Pius X, okay? In Rome, to be appointed a new bishop, this guy said, I want some of the boys from Bergamo to assist me in the ceremony, which Angelo Roncalli and co did. Thinking about going to Bergamo now to be the new bishop, he thought, I need someone to be my secretary. Who did he choose? Roncalli, okay? So the two of them toodle off to Bergamo in 1904 and begin a wonderful 9-year association. Roncalli didn't study canon law, he's now the bishop's secretary. He finds time to teach history at the local seminary, and he begins to foust around the archives to discover the history of the church, history of the diocese, the history of these bishops of Bergamo, and he starts to publish some articles on history, okay? The bishop, Rodini Tedeschi, did what bishops of the Trent era were meant to do. Pastoral bishop, zealous bishop, a true shepherd and father for the diocese. He begins an extensive visitation, a man aware of social needs, a sponsor of Catholic action for men and women, a great sponsor of lay apostolates, okay? He did all this in the diocese. And young Roncalli was by the side of this zealous shepherd, pastoral bishop, okay? In Italy, they do what we don't do in Australia terribly well, okay? When we hear the word synod, here in Australia, who do we think of? Anglicans, God love them, okay? It's a great punch-up every year, every 3 years when they have a synod, okay? Bishops, clergy, laity get together. It's a traditional form of governance in the Anglican Church, but it actually reaches deep into Christian roots for the Catholic Church and for the Orthodox Church as well, okay? Rodini Tedeschi, after the extensive visitation of his diocese, wanted to hold a synod for the diocese. And his secretary, Roncalli, was the secretary of the synod, okay? After Tedeschi died in 1914, Roncalli published this biography called My Bishop, okay? Turn over the page. Could we have a volunteer to read the second paragraph? there had been no... This is a biography of the bishop and talking about the various apostolates of the bishop. Who's going to read the second paragraph for us? Do I have a volunteer? Nice loud voice. Someone? Go.
There has been no synod in Bergamo since 1724, a gap of nearly 200 years. So the occasion had special significance. The massive hole with new diocese legislature, which had been found here and there in innumerable documents, instructions, traditions and local customs.
Look at the language here. Yep, go.
Was revised, brought into line with the needs of modern times and altered circumstances, and given new authoritative confirmation.
Where will we hear this language again? Where do you think we'll hear this language again about taking the old customs and traditions and legislation of the church, bring it giving it some revision, bring it into line with the needs of modern times and giving it new and authoritative confirmation? Ladies and gentlemen, I give to you Exhibit A. This is John the 23rd as a young historian now saying the synod was so significant that it helped the bishop take the old parts of the legislation of the diocese, respond to what? The needs of modern times and altered circumstances, and give these traditions new and authoritative confirmation. You can see the language being formed that would accompany him during his life. What's he using the biography to do? Yes, he writes the biography to pay tribute to the bishop who died and who he loved very much. But he's using history to do? Interpret change, okay? Again, I repeat this ad nauseum. If we don't get this, the man makes no sense and the council he called was an absolute waste of time. If we don't get it, okay? Rewind, okay? There in Bergamo, by the side of the bishop, in 1906, he'd only been there a couple of years, okay? In 1906, Roncalli was accompanying the bishop to a meeting of other bishops in Milan, okay, to prepare for a provincial council of all the dioceses of northern Italy, okay? As the bishops ran off and talked about what bishops do, secret men's business, okay, Roncalli went off to the Milan archives to do some foostering around, okay? And as he's going through the Milan archives, he came across this extraordinary discovery. He found pages and pages of documents relating to Borromeo visiting the Diocese of Bergamo in the wake of Trent in 1575, okay? Hundreds and hundreds of pages of notes. I've handled these documents, I've seen them myself, okay? Hundreds of pages. He said, oh my goodness, this is about Borromeo. This is about my Diocese of Bergamo. This is about the pastoral renewal of the church in the wake of the Council of Trent. So he ran to the bishops and said, Bishop, I found these extraordinary documents. We must do something with them because 1906, in 1910, the church was celebrating the third centenary of Borromeo's canonisation. He said, let's use these documents to publish a tribute to Borromeo. The bishop said, excellent. I'll start a committee. That's what bishops do, okay? And what's a committee? A group of the unhappy, elected by the unwilling, to do the unnecessary, okay? So the committee got going and they got the documents, they copied them, they transcribed them, they started to edit them, but again, with all due respect, we're dealing with the Italians here. They're always running a bit behind schedule, okay? So 1910 came and went, the big centenary celebrations, the things were still in draft form, and then it was going to get printed, going to get published, got revised, something happened, someone got sick, someone got transferred, okay? And the project fell apart. Then comes 1914. What happened in 1914? The First World War broke out. In the same year, Rodini Tedeschi dies quite young. The new bishop gets appointed to Bergamo. Roncalli's no longer the bishop's secretary, and the bishop said, I'm not interested in these publishing ventures, don't worry about it. But Roncalli put the material away, saying, one day I will publish this, okay? It stayed in his mind about Borromeo, Trent, the bishop and the pastoral renewal of the church, okay? It never left him. His career then moves on. In 1921, he finds himself back in Rome, okay? He's now the national director of the missions office, okay? Raising money for the missions, okay? He's in Rome as a lower rank Monsignor, helping to raise money for the missions, okay? In 1925, completely out of the blue, he gets appointed an archbishop. Out of the blue, he gets made the apostolic visitor, papal diplomat. He wasn't trained in papal diplomacy. He gets made the papal diplomat to Bulgaria.
What have you done to deserve that?
Exactly. Now, with all due respect, if you want your career to go somewhere in the church, you don't get appointed to Bulgaria. But he did, okay? Out of obedience to the Pope and to the will of God, he said, became an archbishop, huge promotion, he gets sent to Bulgaria. He thinks he's going to Bulgaria for only 6 months, to go there, visit. It's after the First World War, change at the political scene, change of culture, change of the religious scene. Write a report, come home, okay? He didn't stay there for 6 months. He was there for 9 years. But it was in Bulgaria that again, he went to a country that wasn't Italy, where the Catholic Church wasn't in a majority, and he was exposed to different cultures, different languages and different religious traditions, in particular the Orthodox. And here, the Roncalli that we know, again, expresses this great sense of openness to the new, openness to the different, openness to new cultures and languages. So in Bulgaria, he spends 9 years as a papal diplomat. And in this time, he keeps writing in his diary, a papal diplomat is not meant to go to fancy cocktail parties with fancy frocks on. The papal diplomat is meant to be a bishop, a shepherd, going in search of the flock entrusted to him by Christ. There are pictures of Roncalli on horseback going to visit these tiny, tiny Catholic communities all over Bulgaria in the hills. He writes in his diary, these people haven't seen a priest in years, let alone a bishop. But this is what I come to do, to be a pastor and to be a shepherd. So he's already forming this pastoral language and pastoral style. It's in this time in Bulgaria that again, he's using his historical studies and journal to interpret change in his life and see the intersection with new cultures, new languages, new traditions that were completely new to him, okay? And it's in this time when he is a bishop now that he models himself on his great pin-up boy Tedeschi, and he recovers all the old material about Borromeo and starts to edit this material. He's in Bulgaria from 25 to 34, and then from 34 to 44, he's in Turkey and Greece. Again, not the heart of the Catholic world, Second World War, but again, different cultures, different traditions, okay? And there, in this time, late at night, he begins to get all that old material and publish this material about Borromeo and the pastoral reform of the church in the wake of Trent. Now, I've got for you tonight Exhibit B. The material he publishes is not a page-turner. It's not a thriller, okay? That's it. 5 volumes of this he ends up publishing on Borromeo throughout the course of his life, okay? Late at night, he finds time to just put this material together because he's using the past to say, the past can say something about what the church needs to do in the present to respond to new and changing times, okay? So in this time, as a papal diplomat away from Italy, confronting more change in his life and seeing change in the culture around him, he publishes 3 of these volumes, okay? In 1944, he gets sent to Paris as the papal diplomat, and he says, good, I'll publish another volume here in Paris. And then in 1953, after most of his adult life away from Italy, he returns to Italy as the Patriarch of Venice. He's now the Bishop of the Diocese of Venice. He says, now this is what I've always desired, to be a bishop in my own diocese, to have the care of souls, okay? And again, the figure of Borromeo is always there, continuing late at night to research, edit, and publish this ancient historical material that looks so irrelevant, but it's helping him frame the history of the church, responding to new needs and pastoral dynamic. This whole pastoral style of leadership and pastoral theology that John the 23rd begins to show to people, okay? 53, he thinks this is now the sunset of life, okay? He's in his 70s, early 70s, and of course things change in 1958 when he gets elected to the papacy, okay? We're going to have a break in a few minutes, okay? In 1958, Pope Pius XII had died. Long reign, 18 years, Second World War, fairly controversial figure, okay? very stern sort of figure, very ascetic sort of figure, sometimes a bit of a detached figure, okay? A symbol of the endurance of the church militant. That was Pope Pius XII, okay? When Pius XII died, he died not in the Vatican, he died in the papal summer residence at Castel Gandolfo. In those days, there's a bit of YouTube footage. There's this very ornate ceremonial procession of the Pope's body being brought back from Castel Gandolfo to St. Peter's Basilica, okay? It looks like something from the days of Imperial Rome. And there in Venice, about to go to the conclave that will elect him Pope, John the 23rd writes in his diary, watching this elaborate, ornate imperial funeral procession, he writes in his diary, "We are not here on earth as museum keepers. We are here to cultivate a flourishing garden of life and to prepare for a glorious future. The Pope is dead. Long live the Pope." He got on the train and went to Rome to the conclave that would elect him, okay? And here would begin a number of surprises for the man who then would become the Pope, okay? John the 23rd. So, in 58, he gets elected to the papacy. We're going to have a break in a couple of minutes, okay? We already mentioned how he was going to be this stopgap, transitional, caretaker, keep the seat warm, okay? And he was the perfect candidate because they said, well, John the 23rd, he spent most of his life as a papal diplomat. Wherever he went, he did nice things. He was warm, genial, friendly, engaging, humorous, was good in a conflict situation, brought peace where there was discord. And a few of the cardinals said, he also did a bit of publishing, didn't he, okay? Not exactly a page-turner, but he did a bit of publishing, so he's not bad at putting a few words together. He'll do, okay? So he gets elected to the papacy, and from the minute that he's elected Pope, all these surprises come to the fore. Again, it struck us at that time, I mean, I wasn't alive, but for people then, it struck us as something different. It's only with the perspective of history that we can start seeing the patterns emerging here, okay? He's elected Pope on the 28th of October, 1958, okay? He's elected. The first question he's asked to accept the election, yes. By what name do you wish to be called, okay? For the last 100 years, the church had had 4 popes with the name of Pius. We thought, oh, well, we'll get another one. Pius the 13th or the 14th or whatever, Leo the whatever, okay? He said, I shall be called John. He said, it's the name of my father and it's the name of the humble parish of my baptism. Strikes you immediately. When was the last time a pope spoke intimately about his father or the church of his baptism? He said, John is an ancient name in the church. Hadn't been used for centuries for a controversial reason in the Middle Ages. He said, John is the name of innumerable basilicas around the world dedicated to John the Baptist and John the Evangelist, okay? I choose the name John. So already he's struck by the intimacy with which he speaks about his father and the parish of his humble baptism. There he is. He's climbing the Catholic hierarchy, the pontiff. And what does he talk about? The day of his baptism. So for this man, baptism and the beginning of the Christian journey of faith means something to him, okay? That was surprise number 1, when he told us the name, the reason why he chose the name, okay? Surprise number 2, don't know if you noticed in the election a couple of years ago, when the Pope gets elected, they prepare 3 outfits, small, medium and large, okay? Old Roncalli here, the large one was too small. So he was sort of bursting out of it, okay? When they finally got him dressed and squeezed into the outfit, they brought him back into the Sistine Chapel and they seat the Pope on the pontifical throne, okay? And then all the cardinals used to go up and kiss the pontiff's feet as a sign of respect. John said, that's to be abolished immediately. He said, don't want to come and give me a sign of respect, shake my hand, embrace me, kiss, no problem. He said, the kissing of the feet to be abolished immediately, okay? Another surprise. Didn't seem significant, but now we can see the pattern, okay? Back then, when a Pope was elected, he had the coronation ceremony on the following Sunday, okay? 20th of October. Pope John said, no, it's not going to be on the following Sunday. It's going to be on a specific day. I want my ministry as Pope to begin on the 4th of November. Whose feast day is the 4th of November? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, okay? The other surprise was the papal coronation in those days took about 3.5 hours, okay? John said, there'll be an addition to the ceremony. I'm going to preach a homily. The Pope never preached a homily. The whole coronation thing went on and on for. He said, I'm going to preach a homily. When he preached the homily, the text said, there are people who look at the new Pope now. They have all sorts of expectations of him. Is he a man of governance? Is he a man of state? Is he a man of the institution? He said, all these things people rightly expect of a pope, but he said, none of these can replace the essential office of the papacy. He is to be a shepherd and pastor of the flock entrusted to him by Christ. Again, this whole pastoral language comes out, okay? Again, a few more surprises, and then straight away, John starts to go out. He goes out to visit the parishes, he goes out to visit the hospital, he goes out to visit the jail, okay? Pius XII left the Vatican about 19 times in 19 years. This guy left the Vatican 19 times in the first month. Constantly going out to do what the pastor and the shepherd does, to visit and meet his people, okay? He took the title, a bit like the present Pope, he took the title as Bishop of Rome very, very seriously. Not as an adjunct, but this is essential to my role, to be the Bishop of Rome, okay? And his style immediately captured people. Humble, engaging, warm, no more kissing of the feet, okay? There was a tradition back then that when Pius XII used to go for a walk in the Vatican gardens in the afternoon to meditate and say the rosary, the custom was that the workers, the gardeners, had to hide under the bushes because the Pope couldn't be seen in the presence of common people. So when Pope John went for a walk in the gardens, he'd be passing a shrub and he'd see him rustling in there. He'd say, oh, hello, there's someone there. He said, could you come out, please? And this gardener would come out. He'd say, hello, what's your name? Enzo. How old are you, Enzo? I'm 35. Are you married? Yes. Have you got children? Yes. 5. How long have you been working here for? About 7 years. Did they pay you enough? No. Okay. He just began the workers, just to meet the workers, and this caught people by surprise, okay? The other thing that happened in those days, when the editor of the Vatican newspaper used to go in to interview the Pope, okay, the Pope would be seated and the Vatican editor would be on his knees taking the dictation. Pope John said, I find that disturbing. Could you please sit next to me? I don't want you kneeling, okay? So he sat next to him. In those days, if the Pope made a statement, they'd write in this very flowery language. From the august lips of the Supreme Pontiff came the following declaration. Pope John said, just write the Pope says. That's okay. It's okay to write that, okay? When the editor left the Pope's presence, he would actually have to walk out of the room backwards. Because you couldn't turn your back on the Pope. The Pope said, this is nonsense. He said, I'll take you by the hand. I'll take you to the door. This is all, it surprised people, this warm humility sort of stuff, okay? But it's a sign of things to come. And then, 3 months into office, he makes the bombshell announcement. The transitional, caretaker, stopgap Pope delivers an absolute bombshell. Okay, so he's elected Pope and he's into his 3 months of office, all right? Now, we know in political discourse these days, whenever we elect a new president, a new premier, a new prime minister, people say, what are they going to do in the first 100 days? For some reason, there's this thing about the first 100 days in terms of, you know, major policy shifts, major policy announcement. They weren't talking like this in Rome, but they were a bit surprised by the old boy in terms of his style. But they were going to get surprised big time very, very soon, okay? So he's elected on the 28th of October 58, and then he makes this absolutely bombshell announcement that looked like it came out of the blue, but intelligent people in this room know it came from somewhere, okay? He makes an extraordinary announcement on the 25th of January 1959, okay? Interestingly, and you'll learn something tonight, interestingly, before the Vatican Council, in the Catholic Church's fairly unecumenical days, there was an observance in Rome called the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity, before Vatican II. But what was the Church's theology about the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity, really? You broke away, you come back, okay? That's how we understood Christian unity. So it was the end of the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity, less than 3 months into office, and again, historians, dates, times, commemorations. Whose feast day is the 25th of January?
St. Paul fell off his horse.
What St. Paul? The conversion of St. Paul. So at the end of the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity, at the Church of St. Paul outside the walls in Rome, 3 months into office, he makes this bombshell announcement. He wants the Church to undertake and undergo a conversion experience. And you have the text in front of you, a paraphrased text, okay? Open up your sheets. Pope John the 23rd announces the Second Vatican Council, okay? We're going to do a bit of an exegesis on this, to unpack it to see the significance of this text. It's only, in the unfolding it didn't mean much, but as the historians go back to these key writings, there are patterns that emerge. There are phrases that we say, my goodness, it comes up again. That phrase is loaded and it means something, okay? Who's going to read for us? Got a volunteer?
Hi.
Jackson, I am prompted.
I am prompted to open my mind and heart to you because of this feast of the conversion of St. Paul. I want to tell you frankly about several points of planned pastoral activity.
Okay, planned pastoral activity. We know for John the 23rd, this whole pastoral thing comes from somewhere. It means something. It's a loaded word, okay? Planned pastoral activity. Keep going.
Which have emerged in my thoughts because of my brief 3 months here, within these church circles in Rome. In doing so, I'm thinking of the care of the souls of the faith.
Just stop. I'm thinking of the care of souls, the cura animarum. He's not worried about communism. He's not worried about secularism. He's not worried about all the other isms of the time. He's concerned, the bishop, the pastor, is concerned with what Trent said a bishop must do. The care of souls, the cura animarum. Keep going.
In these modern times.
Not in the past. I know Borromeo. I know 1575. I know the past he's saying, but I'm concerned about the care of souls in these modern times. This is going to become crucial, okay? These modern times. Keep going.
I know that everybody is watching me as the new Pope.
You betcha they are, boy. Big time. Keep going.
Wondering what kind of time this will be for the church.
They certainly are, and wait till we get to the end of this announcement. Keep going.
I'm gradually settling into my new role and beginning to see how it will fit into the overall history of the church.
See, Pope historian, how it's going to fit into the overall history of the church. Broad, wide perspective. Historian, okay? Keep going. Not canon lawyer.
As you know, I have a double responsibility as both Bishop of the Diocese of Rome and Shepherd of the Universal Church.
Okay? I have a double responsibility. Bishop of this diocese and Shepherd of the Universal Church, okay? Quite clearly articulated. Keep going.
I'm paying attention to both of these, as I should. First, let me reflect on the city of Rome. It is much changed.
Let me reflect on the city of Rome. It is much changed. That key word again. Changed. He's talking about the city of Rome that he knew as a young seminarian in 1901. He's now back as Pope with an enormous responsibility, and now, boys and girls, it's 1959. And what's he saying? He's saying the great eternal city of Rome, the great headquarters of the Catholic Church, the Catholic world, the great heart of Christendom. He's saying, boys, this is a changed city. We talk about it as if it's eternal, as if it's some sort of cloud that just moves in the sky. He's saying, no, we are dealing with a changed reality. John's like the prophet. He sees things with different eyes. He sees different things and he's calling attention to this. This is a changed city. Keep going, Jackson.
It is much changed since my own youth and is now a bustling city with rapid growth, especially in the suburbs, struggling at times to be a unified city and community.
This is the great post-war urbanisation that's happening all around the world, okay? It's happening right under their noses here in Rome. Keep going.
I have been briefed on the spiritual condition of the people in Rome, and I am pleased with the wonderful efforts of the Cardinal Vicar, who handles the day-to-day activities of this local diocese.
You see, the Pope would appoint a Cardinal Vicar. The Cardinal Vicar would be the acting bishop. This Pope's saying, no, I'm the bishop. I've got to be like a duck. I've got to quack like a duck, look like a duck. I've got to act like a bishop, speak like a bishop, think like a bishop of a normal diocese, okay? The Cardinal Vicar is doing a great job, but I'm not going to palm the job off to him. I take my responsibility as a shepherd and a pastor seriously. Why? Because the Council of Trent said so. Why? Because the Gospels say so. Why? Because it's essential to the heart of the episcopal office. Why? Because my two great pin-up boys, Tedeschi and Borromeo, they took it seriously. And so am I. Keep going.
He and his staff have been vigilant and zealous in providing for the local needs. But on the other hand, I remember the story in the Gospels when the great crowds call on Jesus to help them find nourishment and grace. It touches my heart as I think of it. A few loaves, a few fish. What are these among so many?
What's he saying? What's he saying here? Quoting a gospel passage, what's he implying here? What's he saying?
It's a small voice amongst those.
It's a small voice amongst, but what else is he saying? What's
Spiritual nourishment.
spiritual nourishment? He's saying, boys, the College of Cardinals, Rome is a changed city, number one. Changed big time. Number two, as the bishop, the shepherd and the pastor of this sprawling new diocese, ancient diocese, I am detecting in these modern times a spiritual poverty. In the great eternal Catholic city of Rome, I'm detecting amongst the people a spiritual poverty.
Spread here.
He's seeing something different. That's what the prophet does. Sees different things with different eyes, okay? See how we need to do it? There are layers of meaning here, like the Gospels. There are layers of meaning to the text. He's drawing attention to the changed conditions of Rome and this spiritual poverty he's detecting amongst the people in this ancient, glorious Catholic city. Keep going. Sorry? Yep.
Who is he talking to here at this assembly?
He's talking to a group of cardinals, okay? They've had the big assembly in the Basilica of St. Paul. At the end of the ceremony, he takes them up to the chapter house of the Benedictine monastery and is addressing just the College of Cardinals, and then this text was published the next day, okay? So, sorry, I should have said that. A very select group of cardinals.
That's why you kept saying boys.
Yep.
Just boys.
The boys, you with me? Okay. Could I get you to just jump to the bottom of the page there, the paragraph that begins, as a priest.
As a priest and now as the shepherd of the church.
Again, it doesn't use the word pontiff or pope. I'm still a priest. Always. You can become a bishop, monsignor, cardinal, pope, but deep in your heart should pump the heart of a priest. As a priest and a shepherd. Keep going.
Pope Francis, his mother said, reminded him all the time.
Just be a priest. Okay, keep going, Jackson.
I am troubled and aroused by this tendency in modern life, and this makes me determined to recall certain ancient practices.
Going back into the past now, you see. Back into the history of the church to recall certain ancient practices of the past that could be of service today and into the future for these changed conditions. Keep going.
In order to stem the tide of this decline. Throughout the history of the church, such renewal has always yielded wonderful results.
Positive outlook there, okay? You see, John the 23rd is the Pope of aggiornamento, this word that means updating. But that word only came on his lips much later in life. Much later. Only in Venice did I find in my research, he starts with the word aggiornamento. But from the very early days as a priest and a researcher and historian, he was always using the word renewal. The renewal of the church, the rejuvenation of the church, the harnessing of new energy, okay? Such renewal has always brought, what did he say? Positive results, wonderful results, okay? Keep going. It produces?
Thank you. It produces greater clarity of thought, solidarity of religious unity, and abundant spiritual riches in people's lives.
Here comes the bombshell. Go.
So now, trembling a bit with emotion, I announce to you my intention to hold a twofold event: a diocesan-wide meeting for this city and an ecumenical council for the universal church. And this will also lead to a bringing up to date of the Code of Canon Law, which will accompany and crown these other two events.
Later in his diary he writes, when I made the announcement, it was received by the cardinals with stony silence. Now, with all due respect, the boys, it's been a long morning, it's a long ceremony, they're not young men, it's getting close to lunchtime, it's January, it's cold, it's winter, they've got their overcoats on and their hats. They're thinking about lunch and the siesta. And this guy goes and announces what? A synod for the Diocese of Rome and a council for the universal church, okay? Who calls a synod? A diocesan bishop. A bishop who wants to act like, look like, a pastor calls a synod, and there hadn't been one in Rome like Bergamo for 200 years, okay? So already he's saying front and centre, we begin by renewing this diocese first. The diocese that I'm the pastor and the shepherd of, number one. Then he mentions the word council. In Italian, concilio. Now the boys would have sat there thinking, concilio. What's the first thing that would have come into their minds? Council. Not necessarily. The one after Trent.
1871 there was one.
What was it called?
First Vatican Council.
Thank you. Well done. You'll get the Mars bar tonight. 1871, the First Vatican Council. When they heard concilio, some of the cardinals at 1959 would have been old enough to have in some living memory of 1870. Old enough to remember the First Vatican Council, okay? Where the Church gave us the doctrine of papal infallibility, where the council was suspended because the Franco-Prussian War broke out, the troops invaded Rome, the bishops had to flee from St. Peter's Basilica, the Papal States fell overnight. But we don't understand this today. You've got to picture that the Papal States were 1/3 of Italy, the southern peninsula of Italy, okay? So imagine the Premier of Victoria going to bed tonight, thinking I'm the Premier of Victoria. Tomorrow morning he wakes up and 1/3 of Victoria's gone to New South Wales. Hate them, okay? That's what happened at Vatican I. The Papal States were completely lost. The council was suspended and all the bishops disappeared out of fear, okay? So when they heard council, they thought, he's going to resume Vatican I. But notice in the announcement, has the council got a name?
Ecumenical.
But has it got a name?
Universal.
No, you see? In 1959, he announces the council in January. 6 months later, in July 59, he says this will be called the Second Vatican Council. And in doing so, the Pope put a line under Vatican I and said, that council is now closed to history. This will be a new council for these new times. The council had no name for 6 months. It was only 6 months later he said, this will be called the Second Vatican Council. He drew a line under Vatican I and said, that will never be resumed. That agenda is over. We need a new agenda for these new times. Okay? And so the preparations for the council began. It was met with stony silence, and then it took 4 years to prepare the council, okay? 59, 60, 61, 62, okay? There was an extensive consultation around the world. Bishops sent in all sorts of suggestions. Some had no idea what a council could do. Some thought we needed to define something about Marian doctrine. Some thought we should condemn communism. But others who were more astute consulted theologians said, there have been these movements for renewal in the church about scriptural renewal, theological renewal, the place of lay people in the church, change to the Latin Mass, participation of the faithful, ecumenism. All these agenda items were pouring into Rome, and the Pope said, that's exactly what I want to see. New agenda items for change conditions, okay? So it took 4 years of preparation, and then the council opened in 1962. Pope John opened the council, presided over the first gathering, and then promptly died the next year. And then Pope Paul VI was elected. He saw the 3 sessions of the council through to conclusion, and the council produced what we often say is the legacy of the council, the documents of Vatican II. Okay? From 70 preparatory documents, they got whittled down to the 16 final definitive documents on all areas of church life, and we're going to hand this out now, right now. That's wrong. Good.
Was the successor a good man to carry on with it?
He did a pretty good job, I reckon.
They're all going to the office.
They're coming your way. Did you get one, Rom? Got one? Okay, we all got a copy? This is the table of documents. You missed out on one, Mary. Hang on. One here. Thank you. Here we go. Okay, this is the table of documents of the 16 documents of Vatican II, okay? I'm going to help you with Catholic Trivial Pursuit tonight, okay? 16 documents, there's a division in them. 4, 9 and 3, okay? 4, 9 and 3. 4 constitutions, 9 decrees, and 4 declarations, 3 declarations, okay? It's a bit like the Olympics. Anyone who goes to the Olympics and gets a medal is very proud. But there's gold, silver and bronze. That's what these documents are. Gold, silver and bronze. The 4 constitutions are the highest authority in the church. The decrees are the middle authority, silver, and the declarations are a lower order. But still, they all form part of the 16 documents of Vatican II. The bishops met, the council was convoked, they debated, they voted, they chopped and changed documents, and then they voted on the final documents, these 16. Touching on, let's look at the areas of church life here. The first one, dogmatic constitution on the church. Then it's known by its Latin name, Lumen Gentium, okay? The constitution on divine revelation. The one on sacred liturgy, and then the pastoral constitution on the church in the modern world, okay? The decrees, look at the decree here. Decree on the pastoral office of the bishop. Notice that word? Pastoral office of the bishop. Again, front and centre that word in terms of the understanding of the Second Vatican Council, the office of bishop. All the other documents, this one's got the pastoral office. It had to hit the bishops right between the eyes over and over again, okay? In terms of understanding this gathering, in terms of understanding these documents that were prepared, and why Vatican II, we say with some authority, is unique and different to previous councils. Vatican II is what number council in the history of the church? Number?
3.
No. 21. Okay? The 21st Ecumenical Council, okay? All the other councils used as their style of language, because they were convoked to deal with theological controversies, all the other councils have these statements called canons. That's where I get canon law from, okay? Canons, these directive, legislative do's and don'ts in the church, okay? And a canon, C-A-N-O-N, had to produce the C-A-N-N. Blast them, boom. This is what the Catholic Church believes in, okay? So the canons in the previous councils went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, directives about do's and don'ts, and they all ended with a Latin phrase. What's the Latin phrase that all the canons ended in? Anathema sit, okay? Not sit with your bum. Anathema sit. What does anathema sit mean? If you don't believe this, get out. Okay? So they defined Catholic doctrine. They said, this is what we believe and teach. If you don't like it, get out. Okay? That was the style of previous councils. The best thing written, I mean, there are books, libraries bulge with books about Vatican II, okay? Mine's a pretty good publication, I must admit. But the best one, out of all the books that have been written about Vatican II, the best one out of all of them, by a country mile, and I can say that being in the country, is this book by American Jesuit historian called John O'Malley. What happened at Vatican II? I've studied with John. He helped me with my thesis in Washington. He's a delightful, scholarly man, okay? This is the best book on Vatican II. Why? Because of all the catfights, all the debates and disputes we've had about Vatican II, he nails it. He said, folks, we're arguing about the wrong thing. We're arguing about the wrong thing. He said, the reason Vatican II is different, the reason that these documents are unique, is that whereas other councils use the canon, the anathema sit and the condemnation, he said Vatican II had none of this whatsoever. None. He said Vatican II used a different rhetoric, a different style of language. It was language not to condemn, not to judge, not to exclude. It was language that was meant to elevate and hold up for praise and emulation. This is the ressourcement. This style of language, he said, goes back to the fathers of the church. In the 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th century, the great theological thinkers of the Christian tradition, they used language not to whack people over the head, but to hold up the beauty of the faith for praise and emulation. The fathers get this language from ancient Greek antiquity. You know, the great tradition of Greek rhetoric, you know, the great philosophers, the public speakers in Greece, holding up the beauty of the democracy, of the community, of society, holding that up for praise and emulation. He says that's where they get it from, this rhetorical tradition. When we use the word rhetoric today in the negative sense, how do we use it? How do we use rhetoric in a negative sense? General use rhetoric. Humbug, it's all rhetoric. Politicians, oh, God, if they talk about the forward estimates of the budget again, I'll die, okay? Empty rhetoric, okay? But there's a rhetorical tradition that holds up for praise and emulation. The Greeks did it in antiquity, holding up ideas that would put a spring in people's step, that say, isn't that magnificent, that idea, that vision, that beauty of whatever. The Fathers used it in their theology, and Vatican II recovered this rhetoric, okay, that John the 23rd used himself, holding up the faith for praise and emulation. O'Malley says the council issued no canons, not one anathema sit, and condemned very little. He said the council used a new rhetoric to open a bridge, a dialogue to the modern world, to seek mutuality, to seek justice, to work towards world peace, the work of ecumenism and interfaith. This is what Vatican II was doing, opening a new vista and holding up the beauty of the faith, of the gospel and of the kingdom of God for praise and emulation. There are no condemnations. The fathers of the church deliberately avoided this style of language because that's not what inspired John the 23rd. He used pastoral, elevated language, okay, to hold up for praise and emulation. In the 1960s, we're dealing with an era of using rhetoric to praise and elevate. Who else? Who was another public speaker in the 1960s who used language to... John Kennedy, okay? Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask instead what you can do for your country. See, rhetoric that lifts the vision, holds up for admiration and praise. The great Martin Luther King, civil rights advocate. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day my little children will be judged not by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream. You see? Holding up. And that's what the council did. In the documents, you'll find this idea of being faithful to the tradition of the church, but responding to the changed conditions of modern life. Some of you lived through those changed conditions of modern life. What was happening in the late 50s and 60s that we can say was honestly a changing world?
I got married.
Congratulations! Boy, that changed your life, I'm sure.
Secondary education came from.
Say it again?
Secondary and tertiary education.
Education was becoming important. People were moving into the tertiary sphere much more. The world was coming out of the Second World War.
Communication changed.
Communication changed. What are some of the elements of communication that changed?
Increased radio, television.
All these things in a rapidly short period of time brought about extraordinary change. What else happened in the late 50s, early 60s? The television, the peace movement, the car, the women's movement, the pill, space travel, commercial jet travel. Today we got iPhones and iPads, but back then the computer filled half this room. Okay, the beginning of computer technology. All these rapid developments in the wake of the Second World War, John the 23rd had picked this up in terms of the changed conditions of life. The response to these modern times, you see? See the language? The perceptive nature, the prophetic voice picking up these changes. And he wanted the church not to issue canons, not to issue anathema, not to condemn. He wanted the church to reach out and build a bridge to this new secular culture of the modern world. Because for centuries, the Catholic Church had been teaching that secular advancement was the work of the devil. The Catholic Church said, out there, the world does all these changes, but we in the Catholic Church remain steadfast and eternal. John the 23rd said, that's not the church history that I studied. The church history is a church that often responds and renews itself to the challenges of modern times. That's what he wanted a council to do. You see, there was no predominant theological controversy at Vatican II, unlike previous councils. We didn't have to punch anybody up there. He wanted the church to enter into a dialogue and to renew itself to face the challenges of modern times. And each of the documents of Vatican II do this delicate dance, okay? They try to be faithful to the Catholic tradition, but then say, in response to the needs of these changed and altered modern circumstances, the Church seeks to do A, B and C. Okay, you'll find that in every document. I stake my reputation on it. Every document has written, the Church in responding to these modern times seeks to do A, B and C. No canons, no anathemas, and very, very few condemnations. Open up the sheet. This is the great document, Gaudium et Spes, the Church in the modern world, okay? Gaudium et Spes. Now, most people know the first paragraph very well. Who's going to read the second paragraph for us? No volunteer? Thank you.
The Council of
That's the one? Bingo, go.
Now that the Second Vatican Council has studied the mystery of the Church more deeply, it addresses not only the daughters and sons of the Church and all who cannot call upon the name of Christ, but the whole of humanity as well.
Okay, why would you want to address the whole of humanity for? Why do you want to get involved in the business of inclusiveness for?
Good dialogue, good relationship.
You see, again, Pope John set the trend. For decades, popes had issued encyclicals, okay? Fairly serious teaching documents of the Church. Encyclicals were always addressed from the Pope to bishops, venerable brothers in the episcopate, clergy and... okay? Pope John, in the middle of the Cold War, at the end of the Second World War, wrote the famous encyclical on peace, Pacem in Terris, okay? I got terrible handwriting, and never improve, okay? This was the first encyclical written, not just to the bishops, not just to priests, not just to the Catholic faithful, but to all men and women of goodwill. Because the Pope thought the business of peace in the dreadful period of the 20th century needs to reach out beyond the boundaries of church, beyond the boundaries of sectarianism, to reach out to all men and women of goodwill.
The Church in the world of today. The world which the Council has in mind is the world of women and men, the entire human family seen in its total environment. It is the world as a theatre of human history, bearing the marks of its travail, its triumphs and failures. Okay, the whole theatre of human history, not just about Catholic things or faith things, but we're interested in the whole movement of humanity here. The Church, the Council here is touching on something we now use all the time and take for granted, the G word, globalisation. We use it over breakfast this morning, okay? But the Council was just beginning to get this dimension of the global movements of the 20th century. Jump to the next paragraph, number 3. An offer of service to mankind. Though proud of its discoveries and its power, humanity is often concerned about current developments in the world, about humanity's place and role in the universe, about the meaning of individual and collective endeavour, and finally about the destiny of nature and of humanity.
I underline that, current developments. That means change. That means no longer business as usual, okay? Keep reading.
And so the Council, as witness and guide to the faith of all God's people, gathered together by Christ, can find no more eloquent expression of his people's solidarity, respect and love for the whole human family, of which it forms part, than to enter into dialogue with it about all these various problems, throwing the light of the gospel on them and...
Stop there, okay? Solidarity, entering into dialogue, discussing the various problems, okay? See the different style of language? No canons, it's a dialogical form of beginning a dialogue, mutuality, seeking the common good, working towards peace and justice. Jump now to paragraph 4.
Hope and anguish. In every age, the Church carries the responsibility of reading the signs of the times and even interpreting them in the light of the gospel. Reading the signs of the times, a phrase that comes from Matthew's gospel. Jesus says, you fail to read the signs of the times, okay? The historian Pope had noticed change. He'd lived through change. He drew attention to the cardinals to say, it's a changed city, Rome. It's a changed world. We're entering into a new historical era. And the Church needs to play a little bit of catch-up here and use a
different style, different language to enter into dialogue with some of these global issues. You see, the famous French philosopher Charles Pegui, P-E-G-U-I, says, at the turn of every age, the church arrives a little late and a little breathless, okay? The world had begun to change rapidly after the Second World War, and here we are in the early 60s just beginning to play catch-up here. But look at the language. Reading the signs of the times and interpreting them in the light of the gospel. For so long the church had said, secular developments out there are sinful and the work of the devil. We are faithful to the tradition. Pope John said, no, some of these secular developments are actually signs of God's providence. We should be entering into dialogue with some of these developments because A, we can learn something from them, and B, we can shed the light of the gospel on some of these secular earthly developments, you see. It's a different form of discourse, different form of language, okay? Look at the next paragraph, which I've underlined. Ours is a new age of history. What's another one word to encapsulate that sentence? Change. Look at the last sentence of the paragraph I marked there. We're entitled then to speak of a real social and cultural transformation whose repercussions are felt at the religious level also. That sentence could be replaced with one word: globalisation. Just coming to terms with the changed realities of the world. Now, I can't take you through all the documents of the council, but in all the documents you'll find this idea of being faithful to the tradition, of renewing the church and seeking to respond to these new historical times. Because that's what the Pope, I believe the great prophet, intuited himself. That was the journey he wanted to lead the church on. We've had councils like this before. He said, that's not why I called the council. I called the council to use a different language and a different style to do something entirely different. To help the church transition into a new era and to begin a dialogue with the modern world. The Pope, ironically, the transitional Pope, who was meant to keep the seat warm, actually was quite key in terms of helping the church transition into a new historical era. And this is where I'm going to conclude with a couple of statements there. This is, at the end of the day, what I believe is the great genius of Angelo Roncalli, okay? He'd spent all his life on the outer, away from Italy, in these far-out places, on the outer, not much thought about, not highly intellectual, not very gifted, no international celebrity or theologian, okay? Foostering around with these books on history and Borromeo. Didn't look very significant. He'd spent most of his life being the observer of history. Once he becomes Pope and calls the council, he now becomes the maker of history. You see what's going on here? From the observer of history to the maker of history, a changed era for the church and for the world. That's one great gift he brings. The other great gift he brings, and I can't prove this, but I've got a hunch and I think I'm right, okay? What's another P word we use for the office of Pope? Say it again? Pontiff, okay? It's not a word that I like. It's a bit of a sort of a stuffy word, okay? And yet as time goes on, I think it's actually quite crucial. What does the word pontiff mean? Where does it come from? The Latin word pontifex, to be a bridge, okay? I've got a hunch that Angelo Roncalli, who was born in 1881, who'd been a chaplain in the First World War and saw the bloody executions of the First World War, who'd lived through the Depression, who'd been a papal diplomat in the Second World War and saw people starving to death in Greece, who protected Jews from being put on trains and carted off to extermination camps. John the 23rd had seen all the isms of the 20th century, the ideological reactionary isms of the 20th century, okay? Nazism, fascism, communism. I mean, one parish a little while ago, I went to give this talk in Melbourne. I said, what's the other worst ism of the 20th century? And one guy replied, Catholicism. I said, no, you idiot. Anti-Semitism, okay? John the 23rd had lived through all this era of ideological division. 2 world wars, brutal, bloody conflicts, the Depression, okay? When he became Pope, the observer to the maker of history, 1958, I've got a hunch. I can't prove this. I can't do another doctorate because Archbishop Hart will never fund it, okay? I've got a hunch. So when he became the Pope, he thought, I can do one of 2 things. I can use my office to build another wall, another division, another reaction. I can use my office to build more walls that divide people, or I could use my office to build what is essential to the papacy, to build a bridge, to open a dialogue, to build a bridge into this new historical era or epoch. And only a historian, a prophetic historian, I believe, could have done this. That's the greatest gift I think this man is and remains for the Church, and what the Second Vatican Council is. Interpreting change in a prophetic, religious way. He said, we've had 5 decades of wars and division and sectarianism and reaction. Maybe my office needs me to build a bridge. I've got a hunch. I can't prove that. He didn't write that, but I think his style absolutely personifies that. A bridge into a new era. A bridge to new cultures. A bridge towards ecumenism and interfaith unity. I think I've got something. I think I'm onto something here, okay? And in the midst of all this enormous change throughout the 60s, people at the council were starting to get nervous that maybe there was too much change, but the bishops kept voting for it, pardon me. On his deathbed, Pope John wrote in one of his diaries or in his journals, he said, people are very concerned about all this thing about change. He said, at the end of the day, remember, it's not the gospel that's changing. This is the man who always talked about change. He said, it's not the gospel that's changing, it is we who are understanding it better. See the dialectic there? The man who change. He said, no, it's not the gospel that's changing, it is we who are beginning to understand it better. And I think that is the third of the gifts that he leaves the Church. Now, if we don't see the Angelo Roncalli right throughout his life, he looks like the underestimated, roly-poly, dum-dum who became the Pope and turned the Church completely on its head. That's what it looks like. But in fact, you can see a whole pattern in his life, a pattern of thought, a pattern of language, a pattern of ideas, and a radical shift from the observer of history to the maker of history. Style, language, and gesture were absolutely at the heart of his pontificate. And the greatest gift he gave us was the Second Vatican Council. That was the Church dialoguing with and transitioning into a new historical era.
Did he have a huge influence on Paul, who followed him and continued on the...
He was always very good friends with Paul VI. And
Paul could have closed it down.
He could have closed it down. Paul VI was the first cardinal that he nominated. Out of all the new cardinals, Paul VI from Milan was the first one they nominated. So already there was a succession plan that worked. Completely different characters, completely different, okay? But John and Paul were the great popes of the council. And of course, these 2 men had such a profound effect on the opening, duration and closing of the council that the Pope of 33 days in 1978 decided to call himself John. And he was only Pope for 33 days, but you don't remember why he called himself John Paul, do you? Would you like me to tell you? Albino Luciani called himself John Paul because he said the first time, the double-barreled name, he said, Pope John the 23rd chose me as a bishop and consecrated me in St. Peter's Basilica by his own hands. Paul VI made me Patriarch of Venice and appointed me a cardinal. He said, I have nothing of the sanctity and humility of Pope John. I have nothing of the culture and learning of Pope Paul. But to honour both these great men, I call myself John Paul I. And John Paul I had been at every session of the council as a very young bishop himself, you see. Language, pattern, style of leadership, okay?